I'm joined in studio now by Professor Lesiba Teffo, just to unpack some of what we've heard thus far. Professor, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Greetings to you and to the viewers.
No, it's a pleasure to have you with us. I want us to start because you were listening in on our conversation with NEC member Thoko Didiza. So I want us to start just where her and I ended off. This was around her candidacy. Pardon us, we must just remind you that it's a very noisy space where we are, so hopefully you cannot hear the others here who are just mingling, but we'll try and raise our voices a bit. Professor, where we last ended with Thoko Didiza was around her candidacy, the succession conversation. I'm sure you saw the media space is littered currently with articles around her name garnering a lot of support from several quarters, those that are perhaps aligned with former President Thabo Mbeki, because we know that when we speak of Thoko Didiza, she was one of the senior leaders within the African National Congress that when he was recalled was among those that resigned immediately. So it seems her name is finding favor there. We also saw on reports, of course unsubstantiated at this point, that perhaps factions aligned to President Cyril Ramaphosa might also be in support of the name Gwede Mantashe. However, Gwede Mantashe has dismissed those, but nevertheless, there seems to be a conversation around her candidacy. What are your views on just her as a politician and as a leader?
Well, look, I've come to accept that a no in the parlance or nomenclature of the ANC is a yes.
All right.
That's number one. Number two, I have never ever said no when the ANC wants to deploy me. Therefore, as a disciplined and a loyal member, I cannot. I mean, you have heard that.
Yeah, you know the standard response.
It's a standard response. But I can only confess and concede that, and is documented. I did say the ANC is not wanting when it comes to talent and ability. That abounds. But unfortunately, over the years, maybe in the few days, I hear a change of tone, vision, and a bit of commitment to doing things the right way. Good men and women have been sidelined who have helped the organization or the movement to go forward.
Would you consider her one, though?
I did say then at one stage that if I were them, I would certainly consider Thuli Madonsela, Vusi Kupikoli, Aaron Motsoaledi, Thoko Didiza, Naledi, right? I mentioned this in public, and then when today I hear people beginning to mention that, I say, oh, perhaps there was some sense that I was making then, and others are shaming. Say, I said this, by the way, 12 months or almost 2 years ago, and it was documented that.
And then among the young leaders, because I just note in just the names that you've mentioned, no necessarily fairly young leaders there that you would think would rise to the occasion at this point. And quite an important conversation, honestly, when you think about it, because the other political parties have fairly younger leaders. So you don't see among the young ones perhaps deputy presidency or any other senior role that they could occupy.
But look, if what I read and what I'm picking up on the ground, and because you are mentioning Thoko since she just left now, or Madam Speaker, with due respect to her office, I can only say the two of them, him and Sputa, Minister Ramokgopa, or Minister Ramokgopa and the Speaker, the two of them, in my, the bit I know, they are fairly young, right? They are both under 60. And I'm putting them almost around 55. So in that regard, I would say it's a fairly good combination. But if they were to go down and they have the ability, the skill, why not consider that? And I'm one of those who's I'm no longer looking at color when I speak. I don't longer look at gender, because there are instances where for the sake of women's sake, we made very critical mistake, right? But few can dispute the ability and the competency of Thoko. And then if you look at her pedigree, all the portfolios she was given from the land affairs as a minister at a fairly young age, she did well. And I have a sense even today that across the political line, she's fairly acceptable as a speaker. But whether she would win the day in her own organization, that's where the challenge lies. But in Parliament, I suspect she could get the nod.
It will be an interesting one. But then to the other conversations we discussed, the most important being governance, because she's been sitting on that commission around governance. The issue around governance and the whole conversation around the professionalization of the public sector is one that has been spoken of ad nauseum. It almost now sounds as though it's some sort of a recital where constantly we hear there is an agenda to professionalize the public sector, but very little change. The Auditor General comes out and always the outcomes are very worrisome. Do you get a sense that at this very venue, there is that desire to finally ensure that there's implementation of that framework, that we finally see speed in professionalizing the public sector, because it has cost them dearly?
Yeah, look, they are not going to go far with that one, for the simple reason that what I said then, I can repeat it today. As long as you have cadre deployment, you cannot talk about professionalization of the public service. It's an antithesis of professionalization of the public service.
But the argument has always arose that it doesn't mean just because they're ANC members they wouldn't be qualified. Ever so often we're reporting and applauding certain ANC members that actually go on to graduate, they attain their PhDs. So in many instances, and Gwede Mantashe has been among those that have protected cadre deployment, saying even in other political parties, when they are in government, they would put their best foot soldiers in those various positions. So even for them, it seems at this point, they feel as though maybe society is a bit far too critical, because it's not always that an individual that is placed in that position would not actually possess the requisite skills or qualifications. But perhaps maybe the experience can be lacking with some, but most certainly that now they have made an effort that even with councillors, they must go to school.
Yeah, the taste is in the eating.
All right.
Because we have been there many a times, right? But what I give them credit for is that at least they are engaged in this issue. And then I think it's Mhlante chairing a committee that says a diploma, a certificate, or a degree for X and Z. If they were to walk the talk, that is the right way to go. And by the way, when we talk, we sound anti, and I for one, being anti-cadre deployment. I'm not saying you cannot employ your own. From within your own, when there's skill, there is capacity, there is expertise, why not? They must be there to implement your policies. But when you don't have a bar, you know there is a bar, you can lower it. But at one stage, they just removed the bar completely. And they ended up with men and women who could neither read nor write, let alone legalist documents. And they themselves ultimately conceded, especially in KwaZulu-Natal.
Well, let's hope that at least when they gathered here, that will be the difficult conversation that they have and reach a conclusion.